This morning I want to start with a quiz. You ready? This isn't hard. First question is real easy. Who is the richest person in the world? Who? Musk. Musk. You got Jesus. There you go. Financially, it's Elon Musk. In fact, he's not just the richest. The second richest person has about half what he has. It's a crazy thing. That's how rich he is. What's the richest country in the world? What? I can't hear you. The answer is Singapore. And the poorest country in the world is Burundi. Now, the average monthly salary for Singapore is about $6,000, just over $6,000. The average monthly salary for those living in Burundi is $141,000. Burundi dollars, 48 US dollars. So from 6,000 to 48,000. There's a big difference in the amount of those who have a lot of money and those who have very little money. But do you know what they all have the same of? Time. They all have the same amount of time. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are. Everyone, rich, poor, man, woman, child, or adult, we all have the same amount of time. God has given us the same amount of time in the week. We have 7 days in a week, 24 hours in a day. We can't buy or barter for more time. We can't decide, this week I'm going to use a little less, right? We all have the same amount of time, the same number of hours in a day. We do, however, have a choice. We have a choice as to how we're going to use the time that God has given us. And so for this reason, time is a precious commodity. It is an equalizing factor for all of mankind. None of us can offer excuses for not getting more done in a day because, we just didn't have enough time. We all have the same amount of time. The real question becomes this: how will we use this infinite resource, or this finite resource called time? We've been looking at how we live because of what we believe about God. And this morning I want to look at offering our time and ourselves to God. Last week we talked about the spiritual gifts God gives us. Using those gifts takes time. It requires time. But because we have been saved, because of all that God has done for us, we want to use our gifts for His glory. And we want to give our time to God to fulfill His purposes in our lives and in the world. Because of all that God has done, it really relates to what we have stated in the last few weeks. Because of what God has done, we make promises. In total surrender, we dedicate our lives to God and to His purpose. With a single-mindedness, we focus on God and His priorities. Therefore, we want to offer our time to God. And I want to point out that there's 2 points, there's 2 parts to this phrase. First, we offer our time to God, but there's a reason. Why do we offer our time to God? Why do we give Him our gifts and abilities back to Him? To fulfill His purposes. His purpose for us, His purpose for the world. Our major focus is on building God's kingdom. It's not building our kingdom. It's not pleasing ourselves. It's building God's kingdom. It's bringing God glory. And the greatest resource we have for that is our time. There's an old saying that God blesses us and with the gift of time. It says the time that God gives us is God's gift to us. what we do with our time is our gift to God. How do we use that gift that God has given us? And so the question is this: what are you doing with your gift of time? God has desires for what we do with the time that he gives us each day. Turn with me to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5, the Bible has a lot to say about time and how we use it. For example, the psalmist asked God, "Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Solomon wrote, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens." James says that it's foolish for us to make big plans about what we're going to do next week or even tomorrow, because we don't even know what tomorrow holds. And so we should consult God before we make plans for our use of time. Therefore, in Ephesians, we are told, Ephesians 5, beginning with verse 15, he says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." Who are the foolish or the unwise? They're the ones who waste their time. They don't seek God's guidance with how they're going to use their time. The wise are those who make the most of their time. They know God's will for their lives, and they use it to accomplish God's will. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want my time to be wasted. I want to use my time for something good. You know, I know how often I've been tempted to waste my time, how often I'm tempted to spend an evening in front of the TV or the computer and not enough time with other people, serving God, building his kingdom. I'm tempted to use my time in ways that bring me temporary satisfaction rather than ways that make an eternal difference in God's kingdom. The Bible is clear that we'll be judged on how we use our time. So I'll ask again, what do you do with the gift of time that God has given you? Now, when I'm talking about giving God our time, I'm not just talking about volunteering around the church to help, although we can certainly use that. As I mentioned earlier, VBS is coming up. We need lots of volunteers. We got a meeting next week, right? Third week in July. We're going to need some volunteers. I'm not just talking about that. It includes that, because that takes time and energy, but I mean more than just that. I'm talking about making ourselves available for God's service. When I do premarital counseling, I counsel couples to think about where they're going to go to church after they get married. I also encourage them to think about how they're going to use their time. I encourage them to spend an hour every week in worship, to spend an hour each week in a small group Bible study, and to spend an hour each week in serving God. But giving God our time includes more than just 3 hours a week. To help illustrate this, let me explain two words that the Greek uses for the word time. They use chronos and kairos. Chronos and kairos. Chronos is the word we use for chronological time, sequential time. It's how we measure time. Hours, minutes, seconds, right? The second word, kairos, is a window of time, an opportunity, the right time. It's not a specific, it's not a measurement, but a window of time, a period of time that opens itself up, and we need to make the most of it when that opportunity arises. The problem is we most often operate on chronos time. We fill our calendars, our day planners with meetings, with events. And as a result, we rush from one thing to the next because we're so busy, our calendars are so full. And so we don't have time for anything else because our schedules are full. We spend our day rushing around. And as a result, we often miss Kairos opportunities. We miss out on opportunities for God to use us because our chronos time is so packed. We don't have time to give to God. Jesus made the best use of both. Turn with me to Mark chapter 5. In Mark chapter 5, we find a familiar story about Jesus and his use of time. Jesus was a master at using the most of every opportunity. Now, maybe it was easier for Jesus because he didn't have a watch, right? At that time, they measured a day by 3 hours at a time, 3-hour increments. We measured a day by minutes. And every minute, we got something to do. We got somewhere to be. So maybe it was a little easier, when you weren't measuring every minute, every second of the day. But there were times in Jesus' life, in his ministry, when he was hurried, when he had to be somewhere at a specific time. But Jesus always had Kairos time for the opportunities to help people who he came into contact with. And I think this is well illustrated in Mark chapter 5. Beginning with verse 21, we read, "When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, 'My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live.' So Jesus went with him." Now, there's no indication at this point that Jairus was a disciple, that he believed Jesus was the Messiah. We also know that even by this time, there were threats against those who put their faith in Jesus that they would be kicked out of the synagogue. He was the synagogue leader, ruler. This was his job. To be kicked out would be a big deal. And so it tells us something about how desperate he was that he would come to Jesus out in public like this and beg him, "Please, come to my house. My daughter is dying. I need your help." And what did Jesus do? He went with him. Continuing verse 24, a large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Just imagine. She'd been suffering for a dozen years. She'd spent all the money she had going from doctor to doctor to doctor, trying to find relief, trying to find help, trying to find healing, finding none. And then she heard about Jesus who healed. And then she heard that Jesus was going to be in town. And so she decided to use that opportunity to go to him. But she didn't want to do it publicly. She wanted to be unnoticed. But Jesus noticed. Verse 30, at once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciple answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" I mean, people are bumping into him the whole time. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, Your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Jesus wanted to make sure she knew that she was noticed, that he knew. He knew about her need. He knew about her. But wasn't Jesus supposed to be doing something? Wasn't he going somewhere? Wasn't the clock ticking? He needed to hurry. Can you imagine what Jairus was thinking? His daughter is dying. Come on, hurry up. Leave her. Come on. She's better. Come on. My daughter's dying. And then it happened. Verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Jairus tried to tell him, she's dying. But Jesus stopped to help this woman who had been sick for 12 years. A few more minutes wouldn't have changed anything. It wouldn't have made any difference, but it made a difference for his daughter. She's now dead. But we know that didn't matter for Jesus. Verse 36, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him, and he put them out. He took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Jesus was on an emergency. You know, is there any time when hurrying is more important? You know, if this was today, they would have had sirens blaring, moving crowds out of the way. Jairus would certainly have been leading Jesus through the crowd, right? Trying to find the quickest way through the crowd, the quickest way to his house to save his little girl. This was a chronos emergency. Time was of the essence. But Kairos intervened. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Stop. Who touched me? There was another need, interrupting what Jesus was doing. Jesus could have seen that this was an interruption, and he could have just ignored it, but he knew that this too was a moment from God, a moment that needed to be addressed, that this woman too was important. Has that ever happened to you? In the middle of important things, there's this interruption. And what seemed to be an annoyance, a distraction, is really an opportunity for God to use you to serve someone else, to be a blessing in their lives. The question is, do we have time? Do we have time to slow down, to be used of God for his purpose, for his kingdom? Because God can only use us if we're willing to give our time to him. If we are so bound to our plans, so bound to our calendars and schedules, we'll be too busy and we'll miss it. We'll miss the moment. So it's in those times, in those moments when we are so focused on one thing that God calls us to remember something else. People are more important than our schedules and our plans, and that time is God's gift to us. So how do we use our time? We need to offer our time to God. We should never be so busy that we cannot serve God. There was an incident that stood out for me. I still remember very clearly when my first semester at Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. That first semester, we attended Southeast Christian Church on Wednesday evenings. And one Wednesday evening, some of our neighbors decided they wanted to go to church with us. And so they were studying for ministry, and I had them in a couple of my classes, and so they went to church with us. At that time, Bob Russell was the preacher, and they were probably averaging about 3,000 on Wednesdays. Not Sunday. On Wednesdays, they're averaging 3,000. The sanctuary fit about 3,000, and it was pretty full. And that's not including the youth, the children, and all the volunteers, teaching them. After the service, these two guys asked if, hey, we want to go talk to him. There's 3,000 people there, and they want to go talk to him. Bob had given an illustration, and they wanted a copy of that illustration, that sermon illustration. And you know what Bob did? He made sure they had it before they left. He wasn't too busy. And that's always what I've seen about him, but he wasn't too busy. He made sure they got it. Our time is valuable. When you get down to it, that's all we've got. The most valuable thing we can share with others is our time. We give our money, we can give our resources, and we'll talk about that next week. But the most valuable thing we have is our time. How do we use our time? We can use it for good, we can use it for bad. We can value it or we can squander it. What we don't want to do is come to the end of our days and realize that we've wasted it and regret how we've used our time. So one thing I want to do today is encourage you to be aware of those kairos moments. Be aware of God, how God is calling you to use your time for others. In that verse we read from Ephesians chapter 5, Paul said that we need to be careful about how we live. He said, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. How many of us are really careful about how we live each day? If we're Christ followers, how many of us continually make the most of the opportunities that God gives us to bring him glory in these evil days? Because usually what happens is we get comfortable in our lives, we get comfortable with our schedules, they're predictable, and we just go through them. Not too much thinking about it. We just get in a routine and we go with the flow. Imagine watching a man fish. He's fishing in the lake, and he's got a bucket to put his fish, and he's got a ruler. It used to be 12 inches, but now it's only 10 inches. The last 2 inches broken off. He catches a fish, and he measures it, and it's 7 inches. So what does he do with it? He puts it in the bucket. A few minutes later, he reels in another fish. Man, this one's got to be 2 feet long. He throws it back. And as you watch him, he continues that process. The little fish, he keeps. The big fish, he throws back. Now, I'm not a fisherman, but I want to know, what in the world are you doing? Don't you keep the big fish? Aren't those the one you want? And he says, well, yes, but my wife's frying pan is only 10 inches. What? You give up what is great because... No, that's a silly story. But how often do we reject the opportunities God puts in our lives because our frying pan's not big enough? We don't have enough room in our schedule. We don't have enough time. If we're going to give God our time, we must choose to live differently. We must live outside those comfort zones and live by faith, trusting that God can use us, and our schedules don't matter. God can redeem that. Let me end with some challenges. First, reach out to someone new. Reach out to someone new. Don't abandon your old friends. I'm just asking you to enlarge your frying pan. Right? Find someone. Pray for someone. Ask God to use you, to show you who you might help. Second, prioritize your activity and your service to impact others. Find others that you can help, and make sure some of those can't do anything to help you. Don't just help those who can help you back and return a favor later. Find those who can't help you. Get uncomfortable. Third, ask God to make you aware of Kairos opportunities in your life. So don't fill your life with so many activities that you're not able to slow down and be of service to others. Give God your time, be available for service. Rick told the story of going on a trip with a friend of his. They stopped at a gas station to get gas, and after filling up, Rick went in to get himself something to drink. He walked up to the cashier and handed the guy a $20 bill and found out his friend had already paid for his drink. He was thankful for that, and so he said, well, take the 20 and put it on that woman's, pay for her gas. When she found out, Rick says she was in tears. She said, you'll never know how much that meant. My husband just lost his job. We don't have much. Can I give you a hug? And Rick says as they hugged, he whispered, Jesus has got you. She said, I know. You never know how God can use us to bless others if we have the time. And if we're willing to serve. If we're willing to offer our time to Him. How will you use your time? We all have the same amount. You can't say, well, I don't have enough. You got the same amount as everybody else. It's how we decide to use it. This morning I encourage you to give your time to God. Allow God to direct your days, to direct your time. And this morning, if you've never given your life to Jesus, you've never taken the time to give your life to Him, to be baptized in His name, we invite you to come, to receive the gift of salvation, the gift of forgiveness, the gift of eternal life. This time is going to be very short. We are promised an eternal life in heaven with God. If you've never accepted that, we encourage you to do so. This morning, if you need prayer, we would love to pray with you as well. Won't you please stand? Won't you come as we sing?